Every time Mexico and the United States think they've made progress, a leader gets killed, a cartel gets dismantled, a major arrest makes headlines, another one rises, and not just rises, grows bigger, spreads further, makes more money. In 2026, there are more active cartel operations across Mexico than at any point in the last decade. The drug war didn't shrink these organizations. In a lot of ways, it built them. These are the 5 most dominant cartels operating in Mexico right now, and what they're doing in 2026 will genuinely change how you see this entire conflict. These are the 5 most dominant cartels operating in Mexico right now, and the stories behind how they got there will genuinely shock you. Stay with me, because number 1 on this list is something nobody saw coming. Now, before we get into it, let me be clear about something. The United States and Mexico have spent billions, and I mean billions of dollars, trying to dismantle these organizations. The DEA, the Mexican Army, Special Joint Operations, terrorist designations, sanctions, extraditions, and yet, every single time a cartel loses a leader, a new one rises. Every time a route gets shut down, another opens. These are not street gangs. These are sophisticated, decentralized criminal empires. And in 2026, they are adapting faster than any government can respond. So, let's get into it. Starting at number 5. Number 5, the Gulf Cartel. One of the oldest criminal organizations in Mexico. A group that once ruled the northeastern corridor with an iron fist, and a group that, by all accounts, should be dead by now. But believe it or not, it isn't. The Gulf Cartel is one of the most historic criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. Dating back to the Prohibition era of the 1920s, this group built its empire in the northeastern state of Tamaulipas, right on the border with Texas. For decades, they were the smuggling powerhouse in Mexico, controlling lucrative corridors into Brownsville, McAllen, and Laredo. Now, to understand why this group is still relevant, you have to understand what they were. At their peak in the early 2000s, the Gulf Cartel was essentially a state within a state. They had their own military wing, called Los Zetas, made up of former elite Mexican soldiers. They had politicians, police chiefs, and military officers on payroll, and they controlled the movement of drugs, weapons, and people across the most important stretch of the US-Mexico border. But here's what makes this story different. The Gulf Cartel didn't just lose power because of the government. They lost power because of themselves. When the Zetas broke away from the Gulf Cartel in the early 2000s and became their own independent criminal force, it triggered a chain reaction that the Gulf Cartel never fully recovered from. They went from being the most feared trafficking organization in northeastern Mexico to constantly fighting off enemies on every side. Their former allies, rival cartels, and law enforcement simultaneously. By 2025, the DEA formally declared that the Gulf Cartel is no longer a unified cartel. Instead, it had fractured into 3 rival factions, Los Escorpiones, Los Metros, and Los Ciclones, all fighting each other for what's left of the territory. And guess what? Even fractured, even at war with itself, this cartel is still moving drugs into Texas, still running human smuggling operations along the Gulf Coast, still holding on. Pop quiz. How many factions do you think a cartel can splinter into before it just ceases to exist? Maybe you're thinking 2, maybe 3 would completely destroy it. Let me tell you, it didn't. Because in 2026, the Gulf Cartel's Los Metros faction reportedly allied with none other than the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, their longtime rival, just to protect themselves from the Sinaloa Cartel and the Cartel del Noreste pressing in from the north. That's the world we're in right now. Cartels forming alliances with enemies just to survive. And the US State Department designated the Gulf Cartel a foreign terrorist organization in February 2025, meaning American citizens can now face criminal charges just for doing business with them. What does all of this mean for the bigger picture? The Gulf Cartel is no longer the dominant force it once was, but its fragmented factions are still deadly, still active, and still moving contraband across some of the most heavily crossed border points on the planet. The lesson here is simple. Fragmentation doesn't mean death. It means evolution. And that's exactly why they're on this list. Now, the Gulf Cartel wasn't the only organization dealing with chaos in northeastern Mexico, but what this next group did, building a criminal empire from the ruins of another, goes way beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Number 4, the Cartel del Noreste, formerly known as Los Zetas. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it should. Los Zetas were originally the military enforcement arm of the Gulf Cartel, made up of deserters from Mexico's elite special forces unit, the GAIF. These weren't street criminals. These were trained soldiers, men who knew military tactics, surveillance, weaponry, and strategic territory control. When they broke off from the Gulf Cartel and formed their own organization, they brought all of those skills with them. At their most powerful, Los Zetas were considered the most technologically sophisticated and brutally violent cartel in Mexico's history. They were the first cartel to use military-grade fragmentation grenades in assassinations. They ran their own internal intelligence networks. They executed rivals in ways that were designed to send psychological messages, not just eliminate threats. But law enforcement came down hard. By the mid-2000s, the original Los Zetas had been systematically dismantled through captures and killings of leadership. It looked like it was over. Now you might be wondering, so how is this group still here? Well, here's what most people don't know. From the ashes of Los Zetas rose the Cartel del Noreste, operating primarily out of Nuevo Laredo, one of the busiest commercial border crossings in the entire world. They carved out their own identity separate from the Zetas brand. They maintained the military structure, kept the violent tactics, and focused specifically on controlling the northeastern smuggling routes into Texas. In February 2025, just days after a senior Cartel del Noreste regional leader was arrested in Nuevo Laredo, the cartel unleashed coordinated blockades across the city. The U.S. consulate issued emergency alerts for American citizens. The Nuevo Laredo International Airport shut down. For 24 hours, an entire border city was held hostage by a cartel retaliating against one arrest. And that was 2025. In 2026, they're still standing. What really pushed the Cartel del Noreste into the spotlight was the U.S. terrorist designation in February 2025. Now here's the thing. Terrorist designations are meant to choke an organization financially, cut off their front businesses, make it impossible for anyone to do business with them without facing criminal liability. But believe it or not, these cartels have operated for decades under sanctions and international pressure. The Cartel del Noreste's response? They didn't slow down. They adapted. They leaned further into controlling physical territory, extortion of businesses, taxation of other criminal groups, and control of the human smuggling routes that became even more lucrative under increased border enforcement pressure. The Mexican and American governments drew a line in the sand. The Cartel del Noreste stepped right over it. The Cartel del Noreste is proof that renaming yourself isn't just a PR move, it can be a survival strategy. By shedding the Zetas' identity and carving out a more focused, regionally dominant operation, they extended their lifespan far beyond what anyone predicted. They're not the biggest cartel on this list, but in their lane, northeastern Mexico, the Texas border, they are as dominant as ever. Speaking of survival, the next group on this list has one of the most remarkable stories of resilience in cartel history. Every few years, people declare them finished, and every time, they're back. Number 3, La Nueva Familia Michoacana and the broader alliance known as Carteles Unidos. And what this alliance has done to hold off one of the most powerful criminal organizations on Earth is something that will genuinely make your jaw drop. To understand this group, you have to go back to the state of Michoacán, a mountainous, strategic state in central western Mexico with deep agricultural roots and one of Mexico's busiest Pacific ports, Lázaro Cárdenas. Whoever controls Michoacán controls the flow of chemical precursors coming in from Asia, the raw materials used to manufacture fentanyl and methamphetamine. That makes it one of the most contested pieces of criminal territory in the entire country. The original La Familia Michoacana emerged in the early 2000s with a bizarre identity. They presented themselves as protectors of the people, distributed food during droughts, funded local churches, and positioned themselves as a morality-based criminal organization. I know, a cartel with a moral code, but it worked for them for years. When La Familia was eventually dismantled, splinter groups rose from it, and eventually La Nueva Familia Michoacana emerged. Not so different from the old one in terms of tactics, but more battle-hardened and desperate to hold their ground. Here's what makes this story different from the others. By 2024 and into 2026, La Nueva Familia Michoacana and Carteles Unidos weren't just fighting off rival traffickers. They were fighting off the CJNG, one of the most militarized criminal organizations in Mexican history. The CJNG had been attempting to seize Michoacan for years, and in response, the local groups banded together under the Cartels Unidos banner, presenting themselves cleverly as self-defense forces protecting their communities from the invaders from Jalisco. It's a narrative that resonated locally and gave them a degree of social cover, even as they continued criminal operations underneath. That's when things got really complicated. Now you might be thinking, okay, so a smaller cartel is just defending itself. What's the big deal? Here's the big deal. Carteles Unidos controls the port of Lázaro Cárdenas, the entry point for methamphetamine precursor chemicals shipped from China. That means they are sitting on one of the most strategically critical criminal choke points in all of North America. Every pill of fentanyl made in Mexico using those precursors runs through their territory at some point. The US government knows this, the DEA knows this, and yet dislodging them from Michoacan has proven nearly impossible because the local population provides them with social camouflage. And believe it or not, the US State Department designated Carteles Unidos as a foreign terrorist organization in February 2025, alongside the cartels they're fighting. That's how complicated this landscape has become. La Nueva Familia Michoacana and Carteles Unidos are a textbook example of why the war on cartels is so difficult to win. They are embedded in communities, they control critical infrastructure, and they've managed to frame their criminal operation as a form of local resistance. In 2026, they remain firmly entrenched in Michoacan, controlling port access and fighting off CJNG at every turn. They aren't going anywhere. Now, everything I've told you so far, the Gulf Cartel's fragmentation, the Cartel del Noreste's adaptation, Carteles Unidos' survival, all of that's the undercard. Because number 2 on this list is a cartel that is simultaneously the most powerful and most unstable criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere right now. July 25th, 2024, one of the most stunning arrests in drug war history. And what happened next triggered a civil war that is still raging in 2026. A war so brutal that it turned Sinaloa State, historically one of Mexico's most cartel-controlled regions, into an active war zone. These are the Sinaloa Cartel, and their story right now is unlike anything we've ever seen. The Sinaloa Cartel is the organization that built the modern drug trafficking industry. Founded in the mountains of Sinaloa State in the 1980s and 1990s, it grew under the leadership of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman into the largest and most powerful drug trafficking organization in the Western Hemisphere. At its peak, the Sinaloa Cartel moved more cocaine, heroin, meth, and eventually fentanyl into the United States than any other organization on Earth. El Chapo was their legend, their brand. When he was captured and eventually extradited to the US in 2017, most people expected the cartel to collapse. Instead, his sons, known as the Chapitos, took over their piece of the operation. And Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the quiet, brilliant co-founder who had always operated in El Chapo's shadow, continued to run the business side. For years, an uneasy power-sharing arrangement kept the cartel functional. Then came July 2024. On July 25th, 2024, Ismael El Mayo Zambada, the 76-year-old co-founder and longest-serving leader of the Sinaloa Cartel, was arrested in the United States after landing on a private plane in El Paso, Texas. He hadn't been caught after a high-stakes raid. He hadn't been tracked down by satellites or informants in the traditional sense. He was allegedly lured onto that plane, and the man allegedly behind the trap? A fellow Sinaloa cartel leader, one of El Chapo's own sons. Now, little did anyone realize at the time, this act of betrayal would not just destroy El Mayo, it would shatter the entire Sinaloa cartel from the inside. What happened next was beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Within weeks of El Mayo's arrest, all-out war broke out inside the Sinaloa cartel. The Chapitos faction turned on El Mayo's loyalists. The Mayos faction fought back. Culiacan, the capital of Sinaloa State, a city of nearly 1 million people, became a battlefield. Mazatlan, surrounding municipalities, checkpoints manned by armed men appeared on highways. Civilians were caught in crossfire. The Mexican army deployed in force, and the violence didn't stop in 2024. It carried into 2025, and it was still burning in 2026. Pop quiz. How many people do you think have been killed in the internal Sinaloa cartel war since July 2024? Maybe you're thinking a few dozen. Maybe you're thinking a few hundred. Let me tell you, by early 2026, estimates from security analysts and Mexican government data pointed to thousands of casualties in Sinaloa State alone since the split began. Thousands, from one cartel's internal feud. And here's what really makes this terrifying. While the Sinaloa cartel was tearing itself apart, its rivals smelled blood. The CJNG began pushing into Sinaloa territory, into Tijuana, into Baja California, into routes the Sinaloa cartel had held unchallenged for decades. And in January 2026, the Chapitos faction was linked to the kidnapping of 10 mine workers in southern Sinaloa, showing that even in the middle of a civil war, the cartel was still conducting operations, still terrorizing communities, still functioning as a criminal enterprise. Here's the brutal reality of the Sinaloa cartel in 2026. It is fractured. It is bleeding. It is at war with itself in ways that have killed thousands of people and destabilized an entire region of Mexico. And yet, it is still the single largest drug trafficking organization operating in the Western Hemisphere. Its fentanyl pipeline into the United States is still the primary source of the drug that is killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. Its network stretched from Sinaloa to Tijuana to Chicago to New York. You don't take down an empire by arresting one man. And the Sinaloa cartel, even broken and bleeding, is proof of that. And now we get to number 1. The organization that, even after one of the most stunning law enforcement victories in Mexican history, refused to die. February 22nd, 2026, the day that was supposed to change everything, and why it changed almost nothing. This is the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG. And what happened in the weeks and months surrounding their leader's death is the most extraordinary story of organizational resilience in the history of organized crime. The CJNG didn't even exist until 2009. Think about that for a second. In less than 15 years, a brand new criminal organization grew from a regional drug trafficking group in Jalisco into arguably the most militarized, most geographically expansive, and most internationally feared cartel Mexico has ever produced. They started as a splinter of the Milenio cartel. They defeated their rival faction and took over their smuggling networks. Then they expanded, coast to coast, state by state. And they did it aggressively, spectacularly, and without apology. By 2018, analysts estimated that CJNG was running over 100 methamphetamine labs across Mexico. The cocaine trade alone was generating up to $8 billion a year. Crystal meth added another $4.6 billion on top of that. By 2026, they had presence or active operations in Jalisco, Michoacan, Guanajuato, Veracruz, Zacatecas, Colima, Chiapas, Quintana Roo, parts of Sinaloa, Sonora, and Baja California. That is not a cartel. That is a national criminal infrastructure. And leading all of it, for years, was one man, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho. El Mencho was, at the time of his death, the most wanted man in Mexico and one of the most wanted criminals in the United States. The American government had a $15 million bounty on his head. The Mexican government had offered 300 million pesos for information leading to his capture. He had evaded capture for over a decade, despite being the subject of coordinated intelligence operations involving the DEA, the CIA, the Mexican Army, and multiple elite law enforcement units. He was believed to have had kidney disease for years, requiring regular dialysis, and yet even that failed to compromise his security. He was a ghost. On February 22, 2026, Mexican Special Forces, supported by U.S. Army units and CIA intelligence, located him in a compound near Tapalpa, Jalisco. In the operation, El Mencho was seriously wounded. He died while being transported to Mexico City. 7 CJNG members were killed with him, and 2 more were arrested. It was, by any objective measure, one of the greatest victories in the history of Mexico's drug war. And then, within hours, the CJNG proved exactly why number 1 belongs to them. The CJNG did not mourn. They did not retreat. They retaliated. El Mencho's right-hand man, Hugo Cesar Maquia Surena, known as El Tuli, immediately took command of the cartel's response operations. He issued a bounty, a reward for every Mexican National Guard soldier killed, not for captures, not for information, for kills. He put a price on the head of every Mexican soldier in uniform. Across multiple Mexican states, CJNG operatives set fire to vehicles, established roadblocks using hijacked cargo trucks and buses, and launched direct armed confrontations with security forces. The Mexican National Guard lost 25 members in the violence that followed El Mencho's death. A Jalisco state prosecutor agent was killed, a prison guard was killed. 32 cartel members died in the clashes. In under 24 hours, Mexico experienced a coordinated paramilitary response that paralyzed transportation, terrorized civilians, and forced a nationwide escalation of security measures. And here's the part that really makes you step back. El Tuli, the man running the retaliation, was killed by security forces within days of taking over while attempting to flee arrest. So the CJNG lost their leader and their second-in-command within the same week. Now you might be thinking, surely that's the end of it, right? Well, here's what they didn't know. CJNG had already been operating as a decentralized network for years. El Mencho was the figurehead, the founder, the brand, but the organization's actual operations were distributed across regional commanders across 11 states. There was no single throat to choke. There was no single wire to cut. The death of El Mencho was like cutting the head off a hydra, and these heads had been growing independently for years. Before February 2026 even ended, CJNG operatives were back at work in Mexicali, competing with the Sinaloa cartel over smuggling corridors. They were pushing into contested territories in Chiapas, fighting for control of migrant smuggling routes on the border with Guatemala. In Tijuana, violence between CJNG and Sinaloa cartel factions continued without pause. The Mexican and American governments had landed their biggest punch, and CJNG absorbed it and kept swinging. And believe it or not, security experts began warning that without a dominant leader at the top, CJNG factions might actually become more violent, not less. Because now regional commanders who had operated under El Mencho's authority would begin competing with each other for control of the top position. History has shown this pattern repeatedly. When a cartel loses its top leader without a clear succession plan, internal competition creates a spike in violence. This is what is happening right now. As of 2026, the CJNG is leaderless at the top, territorially expansive, militarily capable, and adapting in real time. There are even reports of CJNG factions exploring a new alliance with the Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, against El Mayo's loyalists within the Sinaloa cartel. If that alliance holds, it would mean the two most powerful criminal organizations in Mexico are sharing resources and coordinating operations. Let that sink in for a moment. The CJNG in 2026 is number 1 on this list, not because they are the wealthiest or the oldest or the most historically significant. They are number 1 because of what they demonstrated in February 2026, that the death of their founder, the death of their acting commander, and the full military and intelligence weight of both the Mexican and American governments are not enough to stop them. They expanded from zero to national criminal infrastructure in 15 years. They withstood the most coordinated law enforcement operation in recent Mexican history, and they are still operating in 11 states, still running drug pipelines, and still projecting enough organized violence to set an entire country on fire in response to a single military operation. That is dominance. That is what makes them number one. So here's the question you're probably sitting with right now. If the Mexican Army, the DEA, the CIA, the US military, if all of them combined cannot stop this, then what actually works? The honest answer, according to security experts, is that there is no simple answer. These cartels don't just survive because they have guns and money, though they have plenty of both. They survive because they are woven into the social, economic, and political fabric of Mexico. They employ millions, directly and indirectly. They fill government voids in rural communities. They bribe the officials who are supposed to stop them. And when one leader falls, there are 10 men already trained, already positioned, and already hungry to take his place. The United States designated 6 Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations in February 2025. The U.S. military began conducting maritime strikes against suspected trafficking vessels in the Caribbean and Pacific, killing at least 145 people by mid-February 2026. Mexico deployed thousands of soldiers into Sinaloa. El Mencho was finally killed in February 2026 after over a decade of pursuit. And the cartels, they adapted, they splintered, reformed, allied with enemies, and kept the product moving north. This isn't pessimism. This is the reality of what we're dealing with. And understanding that reality is the only way to begin to change it. If you made it to the end of this video, I genuinely appreciate you. The stories behind these organizations are complicated, they're ugly, and they're real. And I think it matters that people understand what's actually happening. Drop a comment telling me which cartel on this list you think poses the biggest threat in 2026. I read every single one. If you want more content like this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next video is going to cover something that I promise you have never heard covered this way before. You don't want to miss it.